Thank you, Paulette. So my name is Rhonda Mims, and I am with Paul Hastings. I head up corporate social responsibility there. And for those of you who don't know, corporate social responsibility in many instances includes diversity and inclusion. So there are 4 pillars of CSR at Paul Hastings, and D&I is one of those pillars. And so I'm joined today by some of my colleagues who work very closely with me regarding our diversity and inclusion strategy. Mr. Kay Whitner, who's out of our Atlanta office, is a partner who is a co-chair of our Global Diversity and Inclusion Council, and Carly Alaria, who is here based in New York, and she's a manager for D&I. And as you can imagine, we've been on the diversity and inclusion journey for quite some time. And over the last couple of years, we've even received high rankings for our diversity work. We've been recognized by AmLaw for the last 2 years as the best law firm in the US. And we're very proud of that, but at the end of the day, we know that there's more work to be done. And D&I is mission critical for our growth strategy. And with that being said, I'm not going to take a lot of time talking to you about what our strategy is, but want to know who's in the room so that we can rally behind the call to action and take the next steps. So I'm going to ask that the technology people bring up the polling questions, and there should be a poll device on your table. I know most of you are technology savvy, so you should be able to work the poll, but I will give you some instructions and walk you through that so that we can get through this fairly quickly. There are only 3 questions. They will help us shape the discussion over the next couple of hours, but also will lead into some research that I'm going to talk about a little later. So the first poll question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being very high, how high a priority is diversity and inclusion for you at your firm or your company? And once you have chosen a number, please hit send so we can record your answer. Do you see the send? Everybody got it? Okay. So you have 10 seconds. We're down to 1 second. Okay. So here are the results. It looks like everybody seems to think that their company or their firm is committed to diversity and inclusion, so that's good to know. The next question, if you'll pull that up. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being very important, how important do you think it is to have a diverse team of lawyers? Staffing matters. You have 10 seconds. Okay, very important. So oftentimes in rooms like this, you feel like you're preaching to the choir. And so you're all ambassadors for D&I, and we expect that, but we also expect that you'll go back and convince some of your colleagues who may not be D&I ambassadors. So the third question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most diverse, how would you rate your outside counsel or your firm on diversity today? Okay, that's interesting. So I guess there's some work to be done, huh? we can all agree on that. But again, this helps us to understand who's in the room, but it also leads me to the second thing that I wanted to share with you that's very important. We have decided to work with Bloomberg to embark upon some research that will go a little deeper. And over the next couple of weeks, probably within the 2-week time frame, each one of you in this room will likely receive a survey questionnaire regarding diversity and inclusion, and we are going to ask some detailed questions to get under some solutions around how we can improve the diversity of the profession. And what that means is that you will represent your respective law firms or your company, but you will also be able to share some of your personal I guess, insights as to what you believe has worked well for you at your firm or your company, but also what you believe could help us overcome some of the challenges. So the main objective here is to rally behind, again, the call to action and to give you the necessary tools to share with us, those of us who are in the legal profession, what it is that we believe has been successful, and why do we think we haven't been successful in diversifying the profession. So, moving on to the next stage of the workshop, I thank you again for participating in the poll. But I have the pleasure of introducing our next facilitator, and she's going to facilitate a discussion. It's not going to be a speech, but rather a discussion, a workshop around the call to action. So, for those of you who have not met this woman, I don't know where you've been, but her name is Patricia Gillette, and actually she prefers Pat, I believe. And Pat is a speaker, author, and former partner at Orrick, Herrington, and Sutcliffe, and has been a tireless advocate for women in business and law. She has served in nearly every national organization that supports women in the legal profession, from NALL to the ABA Commission on Women in the Profession to the University of Texas Center for Women in the Law Consortium. She has been working to improve the representation of women on corporate boards through her work with an organization called Direct Women. She's the founder of the Opt-In Project and co-chair of the San Francisco Bar's No Glass Ceiling Initiative. She has written numerous articles, been published in newspapers, blogs, journals, etc., or newspapers such as Wall Street Journal, New York Times. So she is someone who, I guess you would say, doesn't necessarily sleep. But she's someone who is committed to advancing diversity within our profession. And in her spare time, she has 2 very successful sons and has been married for 40 years and is an elected official in her hometown of Kensington, California. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Pat Gillette.
Thank you for that very generous introduction. That was very sweet. Boy, I'm going to hire her as a publicist. Now, I'm going to answer that question, why lawyers are behind everybody else. It's easy. Think about it. We are the only profession that refers to people who aren't lawyers as what? Nons. Right? We refer to people who aren't lawyers as non-lawyers. There is no other profession that does that. There's not a non-CEO, a non-physician, right? That's because we are special. We're so special that we don't have diversity in our profession. Anyway, that's my answer. I'm going to make a few opening remarks before I let you do the rest of the work. The fierce urgency of now. Has anyone ever heard that expression? It was something that was used by Martin Luther King in the 1960s when he was referring to the need for change. When he said, we need to move the dial. We need to level the playing field. We need to change the face of power. And yet we stand here 50 years later, and none of that has really changed. Why is that? Why is it? We, people in this room who are obviously committed to diversity based on the survey we just did, we have waited patiently. We have waited patiently for years to be included in the leadership ranks of our firms, our organizations, our companies, to be welcomed into the C-suite, to have those top jobs in our organizations, so that we can impact the things that matter most. The culture of companies, the policies, the practices, the decisions that are made that affect our lives. We have seen what I call the two-seater mentality prevail for years and years and years. What is that? Two-seater mentality? There's only 2 seats that can be filled by women and or minorities in any organization at the top, whether it be the board, the C-suite, whatever. Somehow, even though there are thousands of women and minorities in organizations, there are only 2 who are qualified to sit in those seats, to sit at those tables. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to have a call to action, as other speakers have indicated. Because today we're going to say we've waited long enough. Today we're going to say it's time. It's time for this to change. It's time for this to be history. It's time for us to make history. We know that the most common way that people give up power is by not knowing they have it. We're going to change that today, because everybody in this room has power. Everybody seated at the tables out there has the ability to make changes, either in the way you interact with people or the way your organizations interact with people. We have collective power and we have individual power. But we have to think more carefully about how we use that power. Why? Because for years we've focused on what I would say were the right things at the time, but are now not the right things. And that is work-life balance, flexibility, maternity policies for women, and setting up diversity initiatives and mentoring for minorities and women. It's not to say that those things aren't important, but what do you think the white men, no offense to you guys in the room, were doing while we were talking about that? They were playing golf, bringing in business, being groomed for leadership positions. They were talking about the business, and they were moving into positions of power in our organizations. And women and minorities got left out. We were pegged as the people who weren't interested in business. We were put into a box. We were pigeonholed. And so we see a lot of women and minorities where? Marketing, human resources. But we don't see them in the leadership positions of our corporations. We see a lot of women in firms on committees like the Summer Associate Committee, the Hiring Committee, but we don't see them chairing the firms, being the big rainmakers. And how do we know that? Because the stats don't lie. You heard some of those stats today, but I'm going to give you some more. Because it's startling when you think about the fact that we have 50% of women coming into the legal industry out of law school and nothing coming out on the other end. Less than 15% of the people in C-suites of major corporations are women. Less than 4% of those people in the C-suites are minorities. And less than 1% of the people in the C-suite are Black. In law firms, 18% of the equity partners are women, and that's been the number for years and years and years. For a while it was 16, which I love, because I could do my Sweet 16 speech, which is really cool in March. But it went up to 18, which I guess I'm glad of, but it ruins my speech. Less than 7% of equity partners, as David said, are minorities, and less than 2% are Black. And then when we talk about rainmakers. So I'm a rainmaker, right? I had controlled millions of dollars. I was one of the few women in the country who controlled that much business. In fact, less than 1 or 0 of the top 10 rainmakers in big firms are women or minorities. And so we remain underrepresented at the highest levels of our firms and our organizations. But today, we're here to change all that. I want to start talking today about the things that I don't think we've talked enough about. And that is, how do we get people into positions of power and leadership in our organizations? In law firms, that means having a book of business, and it means showing an interest in the business. In corporations, that means having a budget, having the right title, and having influence. And both require that people be interested and understand the financials of their organizations, the politics of their organizations, the power structure of their organizations, how you get to where you need to go, which means transparency, asking for it, demanding it, and getting it. Now, there's certain things that stand in the way, and Paulette mentioned it, as did David. Implicit bias is huge, right? In the old days, I'm an employment lawyer, we called it unconscious bias. I'm not sure what the right word is. I put that into 3 categories. He looks like me. It's easier to work with someone who looks like me, so I don't consciously choose someone who's a man or a woman, but it's just easier if they look like me to have them work with me. The second one is she looks like me. These are the queen bees who intentionally keep other women out. The queen bees also can be minority women who make it to the top and don't want to let anyone else in. It's live and well in the baby boomer, my generation. Hopefully it won't be carried on to the millennials. And the last one is he or she looks like me, but she doesn't really want to. And this is the road to hell is paved with good intention, right? This is the person who thinks they're doing the right thing. Oh, I'm not going to give candid feedback to this minority woman because it might hurt her feelings. So instead, I'm just not going to work with her anymore. What do they say to the white man? You screwed up. You need to fix it. Don't do that again. But what do they say to the minority woman? You did a great job. Thanks a lot. And then you never see him again. Or the woman is coming back from maternity leave, and the man who doesn't want to impose upon her a trial that's out of town because that would be so hard for her with her family. So instead of letting her make the decision, he makes the decision for her and doesn't offer her the opportunity. That's what we call implicit bias. And implicit bias is insidious. The problem with it is it hides in the shadows of employment decisions. It's like being in the dark, knowing there's something there, but not being able to identify exactly what it is. And so it's really hard to fix. But there are certain things that we can do to address those implicit biases. And Paulette mentioned some of them. That is checking yourself. So I'm going to tell a story on myself, because I like to indicate that everyone has implicit bias, including me, who thinks of myself as so enlightened and so liberal and left of the left. I was at a restaurant in New York, the Simone, if anyone's been there. It's a wonderful restaurant. So we know the manager there because we've eaten there a lot. And in walks this really tall African-American guy. It's in March, right? My husband's a huge basketball fan. I say, that's a famous basketball player, right? He looks at me, he's like, no, it isn't. I'm like, yes, it is. I'm telling you. So we call Tina over and say, Tina, is that a basketball player? And she looks at me, she goes, no, he's a surgeon. I'm sitting there going, oh my God. I mean, my implicit bias, tall black guy must be a basketball player, right? How do I feel? Every single one of us in this room, if you dig deep, you can tell a story like that because everybody has biases. But uncovering those biases is what we have to start doing. And checking people who have those biases, confronting them, not in a bad way because they aren't always intended to be bad, but just checking people. Is there another way to think about that? Is there another way to approach that? Could we ask the person instead of making a decision for them? But there are also structural things that we can do in our firms that will change the impact of implicit bias. You could think about something like succession planning for client relationships, institutional client relationships. Just think about it. If we had a plan for how those relationships would be passed on, you could immediately catapult women and minorities to the top of the compensation structure by giving them an institutional client, assuming the client agrees with that. By having succession plans for leadership, which corporations have had for years, law firms have not had them, where you actually think about who are the potential leaders, who are the people that we could groom to be in leadership positions. If we think about the way we tell people what it takes to be a leader, being transparent about what that is. It's not this magic box that people go into and come out of as a leader, but these are the qualities that we're looking for. These are the qualities that matter to us as a firm or an organization. We can think about the structure of our law firms. The opt-in project that Rhonda mentioned is something I did in 2006, 2007 that said change the structure of law firms, get rid of the billable hour, get rid of the one-way up, get rid of measuring people by year out of law school instead of by the quality of their work or their competencies. And I'm proud to say that a lot of those things have been adopted by a lot of firms, but the structure of law firm works against women and minorities. It works against the millennials, and they will change it if we don't change it. It's just going to take more time. We can think about the pressure that clients can put on firms to bring in more diversity and really mean it. Not have clients who collect all this data and then put it in some room and never look at it again. Or for their really important cases, diversity doesn't matter. But having clients really put pressure and meaningful pressure. And Paulette gave us an example of how that might become easier to do and more transparent as opposed to these forms that everybody fills out. Remember, we are lawyers. We know how to manipulate data. We also have to think, though, about how individuals can change what they do. And that means we have to self-promote. We have to learn to self-promote, to ask for opportunities. Women and minorities often feel that they have to be better than everybody else. They have to do more. They have to be perfect. And we have to make those women and minorities understand that that's not the bar. I have 2 sons. I live in a house of men. That's why I love men. But we have to understand that men don't ever think they have to be perfect. There's a study that was done where there's 10 qualifications for the job. A man applies because he has 2 of them. He's like, I think I might be overqualified. The woman's got 9 of them, and she's like, I don't know if I can do the job, right? I mean, seriously, we have to get rid of being perfect. We have to self-promote. We have to ask for opportunities. We have to be willing to put ourselves on the line and say, I want to go on that pitch. I want to be included in who's being considered for the next C-suite position. I want to have opportunities for me. For people in law firms, we have to think about origination credit. You know, women and minorities are taken on pitches all the time. Trot them out. We had an African-American guy at one of the firms I worked in, very handsome, very well educated. We took him on every pitch. He was a bankruptcy lawyer. He never was going to get any of the business we were pitching for, right? But we took him out on those pitches, and he never got 1 ounce of origination credit for helping bring that client in. But we had a diverse team. Instead, asking for origination credit. And then checking for implicit bias. As I said, when you see it, you need to talk about it. When you see it in yourself, you need to think about it. You see it in others, you need to tell them that they may be considering something that's not appropriate. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the challenges that we face and how we can harness the power in this room. We have general counsels, we have C-suite people, we have law firm people in this room today who have the power to make changes, to help us increase the diversity in our organizations. Because unless we're in the room where decisions are being made, we can't make a difference. And unless we're at the table, we can't force the issues that need to be forced in order to increase diversity. And unless we're both at the table and in the room, we can't make decisions that are going to change the policies and practices of our organizations, that are going to increase social responsibility, that are going to increase inclusion, and that thereby will increase the effectiveness of our businesses. So today, I'm going to ask each of you to embrace the fierce urgency of now. And you know why? Because it's time. It's time. So now it's your turn. What we're going to do is we've identified some things, and if you can change the slide, that we think contribute to issues of diversity and inclusion. And what we want you to do is identify the top 3 things for your organization that you think challenge the ability to increase diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to read them for you for those of you who can't see. Number 1 is lack of succession planning for leadership, lack of succession planning for institutional client relationships, lack of diversity on the compensation committee of firms, lack of diversity on executive management committees, insufficient pressure from clients for diverse teams, unfair allocation of origination credit, not getting assigned to lead roles on cases, not getting asked to go on client pitches, implicit or unconscious bias, billable hour requirements, failure to get critical feedback, pay equity issues, being held to a higher standard, not getting enough credit for the work that you've done, and insufficient exposure to decision makers. For those of you who are in corporations, you can either answer that for your organization, but some of them don't apply. So you can answer them for what you think about what's going on in your law firms. I go around the country talking to law firms and corporations, and what I know is that these factors, these 15 factors, have a lot to do with why we don't see more advancement in law firms. But they also apply to corporations. I was in-house at B of A for 6 years, so I've been in your position, and I've seen some of those same things in the in-house organizations. So what we'd like you to do is pick the top 3 that you think make a difference in our ability to advance inclusion and diversity. And the way you'll do that, if you thought number 8 was top, you would press 8 and then send, right? And then your next one would be 11 and then send, and then 15 and then send. And we'll calculate that. We'll come up with what we think are the top 9, because we have 9 tables here. And then we're going to assign those to your tables, and you're going to talk about solutions, because we're here not to just complain and note the problems that we have, but we're here to talk about solutions and to use our collective wisdom and collective brains to do that. So if you can put it up there, and I think you have 30 seconds. Three, two, one. Okay. Now magically, somehow we figure what this is. Okay, so implicit or unconscious bias gets top. Lack of diversity on executive management committees second. Insufficient exposure to decision makers. Failure to get critical feedback. Lack of succession planning. Lack of planning for institutional client relationships. Insufficient pressure from clients for diverse teams. Not getting asked to assign lead roles on cases, etc. Okay, so the last one is lack of diversity on the compensation committee. Interesting. And billable hour requirements. Very interesting. Who are the lawyers in the room who didn't vote correctly on that? Okay, so what we're going to do is, why don't we let you choose? Well, no, we'll do it this way. We're going to assign one of these to each of the tables, and then you will talk about that and come up with a solution. You're going to be given about 10 minutes to talk and come up with a solution. So I'm going to number the tables off. This is like grammar school. Okay, you're table 1, then you're what? Good. And you? Okay. What are you? 6. 9 at the back. Okay? All right. So 1 is implicit bias. 2 is lack of diversity on executive management committees. 3 is insufficient exposure to decision makers. 4 is critical feedback. 5 is lack of succession planning for leadership. 6 is lack of succession planning for client relationships.